Welcome to In the News. I'm Ron Jacobsohn, sitting in for Mark Golob. And in the news today, we are continuing to be haunted by the agreement with the Islamic Republic of Iran, which threatens in so many ways the existence of the State of Israel. In Israel itself, though, the Iran agreement has already phased out from the headlines, as so many other breaking news stories have occurred in the Jewish state since last Thursday. But that in no uncertain terms undermines the threat that is still looming in the air of what will happen once those sanctions against Iran will be lifted. The New York Times' columnist Thomas Friedman had the opportunity to sit down with President Barack Obama over the weekend for a 45-minute interview that was also videotaped. In the first half of the interview, Friedman asked some very direct questions about what the Iran deal has done to the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. The president, in a very candid moment, actually talks about his personal feelings about what happened between him and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, while reiterating again and again the administration's commitment not only to Israel, but the Jewish people as a whole. Let's listen in to some highlights of the interview Thomas Friedman conducted for the New York Times with the president.
If you remember the speech that I gave at the United Nations, I was very clear that one of the core interests of the United States, in my mind, and this is how our administration operated, is that our allies in the region will be protected. We will work with them and come to their defense. And we don't have a greater ally than Israel in the Middle East. And so, what I have done is instruct my team to work with the Israelis to build on the already unprecedented military and intelligence cooperation that's in place. I think even in the midst of the disagreements that I've had with Prime Minister Netanyahu, both on Iran as well as on the Palestinian issue, I've been consistent in saying that our defense of Israel is unshakable. I would consider it a failure on my part, a fundamental failure of my presidency, if on my watch, or as a consequence of work that I've done, Israel was rendered more vulnerable.
Not just a strategic failure.
And I think that's not just a strategic failure, I think that would be a moral failure. Israel is right to be concerned about Iran, and they should be absolutely concerned that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. What I would say to the Israeli people is, however, that there is no formula, there is no option to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon that will be more effective than the diplomatic initiative and framework that we put forward. There has to be the ability for me to disagree with a policy on settlements, for example, without being viewed as, in some fashion, opposing Israel. There has to be a way for Prime Minister Netanyahu to disagree with me on policy without being viewed as anti-democrat. And I think the right way to do it is to recognize that as many commonalities as we have, there are going to be strategic differences here. And I think that it is important for each side to respect the debate that takes place in the other country. It has been personally difficult for me to hear the sort of expressions that somehow we don't have, this administration has not done everything it could to look out for Israel's interests, and the suggestion that when we have very serious policy differences, that's not in the context of a deep and abiding friendship and concern and understanding of the threats that the Jewish people have faced historically and continue to face. That's something that I feel deeply and I feel personally, and will continue to do so.
I believe that all the criticism that President Obama has endured as a result of the Iran deal sound he does sound very sincere, at least to me, in how he feels towards Israel. As always, only time will tell if those were just beautiful words or something he wholeheartedly believed in. To shed some more light about the issue, I am very honored to have with me live from Israel via Skype, Meir Javedanfar, the professor in the IDC in Herzeliya on contemporary Iranian politics, co-author of the first biography on the current Iranian president, the nuclear sphinx of Tehran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and the state of Iran, which has already been translated into numerous languages, and the owner of the much talked about website, IranIsraelObserver.com. Thank you, Meir, for joining us at this late hour from Tel Aviv.
Thank you, Ron. It's great to be with you.
So tell us, how terrible is this deal?
I wouldn't use the word terrible, and I wouldn't use the word deal. It's an understanding. It's not a deal yet. This is a draft agreement. Both sides have walked away with a number of understandings, which actually the Iranian side is now challenging, because the U.S. government, if you go on the U.S. State Department, they've put the fact sheet there, and the Iranians have come up with their own fact sheet. And I tend to believe the U.S. one, because I don't think President Obama would go around lying to his own people about this, because he would know what would happen to him in the Congress. Whereas the Iranian regime, although it does care about its own people, but only when the situation gets really badly, and it has gotten away with lying to its own people before. So it's not a deal. Is it terrible? I wouldn't use the word terrible. No, I would say there are areas that can be improved. But there are areas that would be very good for Israel, actually. There are a number of understandings that have been reached, which we have to see if they turn into a deal at the end of June, which I think would be very good for the state of Israel. And at the same time, there are things that need to be explained, that need to be nailed down, that need to be improved in order to make this something that would be good for the state of Israel and good for the United States of America.
Give us an example of some of the positive points, because we've not heard of any of them so far.
Sure. There are two potential gunpowders that's equivalent, the example of a gunpowder. We in Israel are worried that the Iranian regime would use a nuclear weapon against us. So imagine nuclear weapons like the bomb is like a bullet. There are two different types of gunpowder that the Iranian regime would use. One of them is the enriched uranium, which at lower level it can be enriched to high level to make a weapon, to make a bomb that can be dropped on Israel if the regime decides to make it a weapon. The other one is the plutonium track. Let's look at what President Obama has done. According to this understanding, all the Iranian sites will be under tough inspections. In fact, they are visited every single day by inspectors. Iran is going to reduce the number of centrifuges it has to only 5,000. Overwhelming majority, I'm looking at the numbers here, out of the 10,000 kilograms of low-enriched uranium, only 300 are going to stay in Iran, and they are going to be lower level enrichment. That's not going to be able to make a weapon with that. Iran regime cannot make weapons with 300 kilograms of low-enriched uranium. So this is actually very promising. Now, you could say, your viewers could say, okay, we could have the Iranian regime could hide enrichment facilities, and that's a very valid concern. So I go to another part of this agreement, to this draft agreement. It says Iran will be required to grant access to the International Atomic Energy Agency to investigate suspicious sites, allegations of covert enrichment facility, conversion facility, centrifuge production facility, or yellow cake production facility anywhere in the country. I repeat, anywhere in the country. So that's basically closed down the enrichment track. Now, what about the other type of gunpowder, the plutonium? Well, Iran is constructing a heavy water reactor in Iraq, which is actually, there's very valid suspicions that it has ulterior motives with that. So what's going to happen if there is a deal at the end of June? What this document says is that the core of the reactor, which could use enough plutonium, which could produce enough plutonium potentially for a weapon, will be destroyed. I repeat, will be destroyed. And there will be a new core that will be designed with the help of the United States that will in no way, shape, or form will be able to produce enough plutonium that the Iranian regime can use for a weapon. These are just some of the points that I think are actually very promising, although I do have some reservations about these documents as well, which I think there are areas that can be improved.
Now, Benjamin Netanyahu in his election campaign, used this whole Iran deal as something that if it's going to happen, this will literally be the end of Israel, the end of the world as we know it. We haven't heard that much since. Was it just election propaganda?
Look, Ron, the Iranian regime has been calling for the death of Israel for the last 36 years. I went to a Jewish school in Tehran. The Iranian people, by the way, don't agree with the Iranian regime's sentiments. I went to a Jewish school in Tehran, and on the entrance it said Israel must be wiped off the face of the earth. We've been spoken to in one of the most humiliating ways by the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime has supported terrorism against Israel and has killed many of our citizens. So even if Mahatma Gandhi were the prime minister of Israel, he would be opposed to the Iranian regime having a nuclear weapon. There's no question about it. Prime Minister Netanyahu, in the essence of what he's doing, any Israeli government would do. But the problem is how he's doing it. Number one, taking on the President of the United States. Now, maybe some of us didn't like President Bush. I didn't agree with his policies. But to think that Ariel Sharon would confront George Bush the way Netanyahu is confronting President Obama would be very detrimental to our national interest in the state of Israel, number one. Number two, Iran must not have nuclear weapons, period. But to say that such a deal threatens the existence of the state of Israel is inaccurate. And what concerns me is that Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying to make political capital from this. The Iranian regime must be stopped from having a nuclear weapon, no question. But to portray this as something that could threaten the state of Israel, its existence, that's just completely and utterly inaccurate.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that now that, let's say, the Iranian regime has become closer, I don't know how much, to the American administration, Iran will be able to regain some of its power in the Arab world?
Ron, that's an excellent question. You see, one of the consequences of this deal is that Iran, if there is a deal, if there's going to be a deal, Iran's going to have more money. Now, I can tell you that right now. First of all, the Iranian regime is pointing with its Hezbollah friends tens of thousands of rockets at us. It's now building a base in Syria. And we were worried that it's going to be in the Golan Heights, and that could lead to war. Make no mistake. I don't want the Iranian regime on our borders. And by the way, I don't think the Syrian people want them in Syria, majority of Syrian people. So what will happen? So what can I do? Some people suggest that, okay, we put Iran's support for terrorism as part of this deal. That's a very prevalent idea. Am I correct, Ron, in the United States?
Yes, completely.
Excellent. Now let's think about that. Let's work through this together. Okay. When it comes to the nuclear program, we can have inspectors who can go to Iran to inspect the sites, to inspect what they're doing, and the Iranians have agreed to that. I mean, if there is a deal, from what we understand from this document, which your viewers can go and visit on the US State Department, there will be inspectors who will go and look at the Iranian sites, look at uranium conversion facilities, enrichment facilities, assembly of centrifuges, etc., etc., etc. Okay. How are we going to find inspectors? Or let me put it another way, because that's a better way to say it. Which suicidal person is going to go to Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah in Baalbek? Or Hezbollah is going to allow them to go there to check their weapon stock and to check their bank accounts to make sure that Iran has ceased support for this terrorist group? Nobody. It's impossible. It's reasonable to want it, but it's unrealistic. To think that somehow we're going to send UNs, look, we can't do this with Hamas, the terrorist organization that's sitting on our borders. To go to them and say, look, you got to give up your weapon. We can't do that. There'll be a bloodbath. How can we send inspectors? Which country is going to send inspectors to Yemen or to Iraq to go to the Shia militia to say, give up your weapon? To think that they're going to give up their weapon is unrealistic in the extreme. And then not only they're going to give up the weapon, afterwards they're going to allow inspections to make sure that Iran is no longer supporting them. So what I'm trying to say is that although it's very reasonable to expect that, because nobody wants Iranian regime influence on our borders, it's just not going to happen. So we have a choice. Do we ruin the chances of stopping a nuclear Iran for this unrealistic scenario of getting Hezbollah to give up its weapons, or do we choose one or the other? Because as you know, in the region, in this wonderful region, but with very terrible developments, it's not always the best choice. You have a bad choice and a worse choice.
Right.
What do we choose? We choose to stop a nuclear Iran because that's, number one, more dangerous. And number two, if there's going to be a deal, it's going to be more realistic in the inspection regime especially.
But what you just said is that actually the threat to Israel is not a nuclear Iran, but the whole thing that with the sanction being lifted, they will have more cash in order to support all their proxies in Lebanon and in Gaza. And that's what the big threat is for Israel.
That's going to be the next threat, because we will have contained the Iranian nuclear threat. If there's going to be a deal, that's going to be the next threat. No question. No question. Now, can we deter Iran in these areas? It depends. If they start building a base on our border in the Golan Heights, no, it could lead to war. But the Iranian regime also looks at us. You know, for 36 years, they've been saying death to America. They've never confronted us directly. They always get the Lebanese and the Palestinians to fight us. You know, the Iranian regime would fight Israel to the last Lebanese and to the last Palestinian. Now, it sees the red lines and it doesn't cross them. So will we, as much as we don't like it, will we be able to contain Iran in this region? It's going to be possible, even though it's going to have more money. Let me just say something else, Ron. I'll tell you another reason why I think this deal would be good if it goes through. If Iran gets more money, because of its support for Bashar al-Assad, who is carrying out one of the most terrible ethnic cleansing campaigns in the recent history of the Middle East, actually the Arab countries are going to become more energized to take on the Iranian regime in this region. And that is going to be good for Israel.
Okay. And what about the fight between them and ISIS? Because Iran is one of the big opponents of ISIS, right? And now we're seeing ISIS becoming bigger and bigger in the Middle East. Will they be maybe occupied in what's happening in Syria, in Yemen, in Jordan, and leave us alone a little bit, or is that wishful thinking?
I don't think the Iranian regime is going to stop fighting or stop challenging Israel. No, I think the Iranian regime will use every opportunity to try to arm Hamas, to try to challenge us. They're going to take on ISIS, but they're going to try to challenge us. I think something else we could do, Ron, also. Security is achieved through a number of ways, and one of them is military. The other one is economy. The other one is diplomacy. And your president has actually done a good job of bringing economy into it, which is why the Iranians are now taking this issue seriously because of the sanctions. I think in order to make life more difficult for the Iranian regime, we should try to improve the economic situation in Gaza of Gazans, not Hamas, but Gaza. But also try to reach some kind of understanding with the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Because the more stable our relationship comes with the Palestinian people who are our neighbors, the more difficult it's going to be for the Iranian regime, or if I can put it that way, it's going to suck a lot of oxygen out of its anti-Israel hatred in this region. This is something that we owe to our children and to our future generations. We should try, and I emphasize the word try, to reach a deal with our Palestinian neighbors, not only because it will help us, but also because it will hurt our enemies.
But do you see, for instance, where, these days this coalition talks in Israel about the new government? Do you see the potential new government that Netanyahu is putting together being even able to talk to the Palestinian?
I doubt it very much, but I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is coming around to the idea that this round he's not going to be able to use Tzipi Livni as an umbrella to defend himself against all the criticism. That's, I think, this time. And I tell you something, I didn't vote Netanyahu, but I'm worried as an Israeli citizen. The world has had enough. The world has had enough of settlement building. I don't want any settlements to be evacuated from the state of Israel. I want our brethren, our compatriots to stay in their homes. But the world is becoming sick and tired of this issue. We are becoming more and more isolated, and the Iranian regime is celebrating. One thing I found shocking was that actually there were some Iranians who were hoping that Prime Minister Netanyahu gets elected. Why? Because they want the current crisis between Israel and America to continue. And this is something that worries me. And the worse the situation with the Palestinians gets, the more it's going to help our enemies.
What have you seen on the ground in Israel? Although it was Erev Chag almost when this was announced, have you seen like reactions of Israelis and maybe even Persian Jews about this looming deal?
No, not really. To be honest with you, when you meet Israelis, that's not the number one issue. Nobody wants the Iranian regime to have a nuclear weapon, but that's not the number one issue in Israel. I don't know if you're Israeli who's moved abroad, Ron, but if you ask many Israelis who live in your country, ask them why did they leave their country? Why did they go to United States? And I'm willing to bet you $1,000. More than half of them would say the cost of living, the economy. And that's the same reason here. For the majority of Israelis, it's the cost of living, it's the economy. And although Iran is an important issue, it's not the top issue. If there is a deal, let me put it this way. If there is a deal that keeps Iran away 1 year from making a nuclear weapon, and there's tough inspections, I don't think the people of Israel are going to demonstrate against it, or the people of Israel are going to demand Prime Minister Netanyahu goes and bombs Iran. No. People will be suspicious, which is very natural after the way the Iranian regime has treated us, but they're not going to go against it. They're going to be suspicious, but they're going to see how the verification goes. Distrust and verify.
Has this deal also made the Islamist regime in Iran stronger? Because there were we heard all those isolated incidences where we felt like, oh, there's a crack in the Khomeini system going on. It seems like if they are now doing a deal with America, it'll just make them stronger there, and the opposition is getting weaker.
It will, no doubt about it. The Iranian regime is going to have more money. But it's not going to be the end of its problems. In America you have antitrust. You have to fight monopolies, if I'm not mistaken. We have it in Israel too. In Iran, there's so many massive monopolies that completely control the economy. And even if sanctions are lifted, although there'll be a massive boost in terms of expectations, the stock exchange is already going up. It's like a rocket. But in terms of people really seeing the benefits of sanctions removal, it will take a couple of years. So yes, it will boost the regime financially, but it's not going to be the end of its problems. It will actually show that the Iranian regime is susceptible to pressure. Ayatollah Khamenei said that he would never allow a two-stage deal where there's a political understanding that could be interpreted. Guess what? That's exactly what we have in this very document of the draft agreement. For example, the Iranians said that they would never reduce the number of centrifuges, which is look more and more likely. So, and the Iranians said they would never, make compromises in terms of the sanctions. I think one of the biggest reasons why they're here is because of the sanctions. So, yes, the Iranian regime will be financially more well off, no question about it. But it's not going to be enough to close the gaps that are appearing in the regime. I'm not saying there's going to be a revolution in Iran anytime soon. It's difficult to predict it. But there are many difficult and deep structural issues with the Iranian regime. Corruption increasingly becoming one of them.
But don't you see like more and more people from what you have contacts in Iran of people just getting sick and tired of this regime? They can block as much as they want, but you still get satellite television, you get internet, and people see how other people live, and I'm sure they want that for themselves too.
Sure. I don't speak to anybody in Iran about politics.
Okay.
Stay away from that. I stay away from that. That's no way.
But that's more of lifestyle, not politics. That's what they want.
It endanger their lives. But I have friends from Europe who go to Iran. I see things on Twitter and Facebook. Of course they do. But Ron, have you ever lived in a country where the police can come and pick you up and then your parents don't know where you've gone and they can't get you a lawyer for 3 months or 4 months? Have you ever lived in a country like that? Thankfully
God, no.
Not.
Thankfully not.
In Iran, the regime is extremely brutal. People are scared, number one. Number two, there's no leadership at the moment to lead they don't have a Moses, they don't have a Gorbachev. So, that's why there hasn't been a revolution. I think majority of people in Iran are sick and tired of what has happened. But don't forget, in Iran, there was already a revolution. It made life worse. So some people are scared. And the other issue is that who is going to lead them? Who are they going to die for?
Yeah. I mean, yes, they didn't think that when the Shah would leave that this will come and they will have it so much worse off than with
Khomeini
the Shah.
promised free speech. Khomeini is something I teach at the university. I show clippings of Khomeini interviews. He promised free speech in Iran. He promised in Iran people could choose their own leadership. It was a beautiful lie.
As always with politics. Now, before I let you go, tell me a little bit about your website, because your website includes a lot of very, very fascinating facts about Iran and Israel, and as the observer, so to say.
I try to be an observer. Look, I come from a very beautiful country. Iran is a beautiful country. The people of Iran are very nice. Just like every other country, you have good people, you have bad people, but please don't judge the people of Iran by the politicians. The Iranian politicians are probably currently one of the worst we've had in the history of Iran. Rouhani is a little bit better, Zarif is better, but they're weak. But again, overall, the people who rule Iran is Ayatollah Khamenei and his regime, and they are really ruining the country. So I come from a very beautiful country with a very proud history. I'm proud of my Jewish heritage. My family lived in Iran since the first exile of my people from Israel. We were enslaved and taken to Babylon, and the king of Persia saved us and liberated us, and my family stayed in Iran. So, I have my own point of view as somebody who lived in Iran till 8 years after the revolution. I had the revolutionary education, and lived in England, and since 10 years ago I live in Israel. So I try to look at things from both sides, and I can tell you, Ron, there is a lot of misconceptions and generalities in the West about the people of Iran. And also in Iran, some of the education that people are receiving about Israel, oh my God, it's unbelievable how the regime tries to brainwash them. And of course, even though people of Iran want to have wonderful relations with America, there's a lot of Iranians from America who go back and forth. So Iranians are far more aware about America, but there's nobody who goes from Israel. So there's a lot of misconceptions, and sometimes I try to, bridge that gap by observing and writing about it. And I hope I can contribute a little bit to more understanding between these two people.
Very good. Thank you very much, Meir, for your detailed explanation of the situation. It was very enlightening. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. This was Meir Javedanfar from the very much talked about website IranIsraelObserver.com. And that concludes yet another edition of In the News. Before we go, let me thank the many people you don't get to see because they're behind the cameras. Our director, Sloan Copeland, assistant director, Dara Golob, technical director, Serge Goldberg, producer, Carrie Lilienthal, and the man who makes all of this possible, who I have the honor of sitting in for today, Mark Golob. I'm Ron Jacobsohn. Good night.